Good morning again. I'm so tempted to make you all move to this side of the thing. You all braved the frigid cold to get here, and you all stayed in your warm homes and are here with us. We're glad for that too. Our first reading this morning is a poem by Carrie Fountain. And part of it talks about an experience that I have never had and never will, the experience of childbirth and being a mother and a parent. But it's very much about being rooted to bodily experience. And I was quite moved by it this week. It's called You Belong to the World. You belong to the world, as do your children, as does your husband. It's strange even now to understand that you are a mother and a wife, that these gifts were given to you and that you received them, fond as you've always been of declining invitations. You belong to the world. The hands that put a peach tree into the earth exactly where the last one died in the freeze belong to the world and will someday feed it again, differently. Your body will become food again for something, just as it did so humorously when you became a mother, hungry beings clamoring at your breast, born as they'd been with the bodily passion for survival that is our kind's one common feature. You belong to the world, animal. Deal with it. Even as the great abstractions come to take you away, the regrets, the distractions, you can at any second come back to the world to which you belong, the world you never left, won't ever leave. Cells forever going through their changes as they have been since you were less than anything. Simple information born inside your own mother's newborn body, itself made from the stuff your grandmother carried within hers at 12, when at 12 she packed her belongings and left the Scottish islands she'd known, all she'd ever known, on a ship bound for Ellis Island, carrying within her your mother, you, the great human future that dwells now inside the bodies of your children, the young who, like you, belong to the world. I really love that. And this is our Bible reading. It's one of the assigned readings for today. It's from the prophet Isaiah, Isaiah 58, the first part of it, in which God speaks to the prophet and says, "Shout, for all you are worth. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Proclaim to the people their faults. Tell the house of Leah and Rachel and Jacob their sins. They seek me daily. They long to know my ways, like a nation that wants to act with integrity and not ignore the law of its God. They ask me for laws that are just. They long for God to draw near, and yet they say, 'Why should we fast if you never see it? Why do penance if you never notice?' Because when you fast, it's business as usual, and you oppress all your workers. Because when you fast, you quarrel and fight and strike the poor with your fist. Fasting like yours today will never make your voice heard on high. Is this the sort of fast that pleases me? A day when people humiliate themselves? When they hang their heads like reeds and lie down on sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call fasting? Is that what you call a day acceptable to God? On the contrary, this is the kind of fast that pleases me. Remove the chains of injustice. Undo the ropes of the yoke. Let those who are oppressed go free and break every yoke you encounter. Share your bread with those who are hungry and shelter people who are poor and homeless. Clothe those who are naked and don't hide from the needs of your own flesh and blood. Do this and your light will shine like the dawn, and your healing will break forth like lightning." Pointed words. There's an ancient story, an ancient Buddhist story told about Siddhartha Gautama, the young priest who would become the Buddha. It's a childhood story in which his father, the king, takes him out into their village for the start of the plowing festival, which is a traditional festival in a lot of Southeast Asian cultures that marks the start of the rice growing season. And in this story, Siddhartha's nurses leave him alone under a tree so that they can go and watch what's happening in the festival. And as he sits there, kind of just pays attention, he notices several different kinds of suffering. He notices the men who lead the oxen, and then the oxen themselves were straining in their bodies to pull the plows that break the ground. And then as the plows turn up the earth, he noticed that they dislodged earthworms and insects that birds would come down and pluck up and eat. As he sat there and watched this and just breathed, he fell into a meditative state. The story is meant to lift up a key insight, what would become a kind of a pillar insight of Buddhism. That even though we are accustomed to thinking of ourselves as individuals, the reality of things is a lot more complicated than that. Without the straining of the humans behind them, expending their energy and strength in driving the oxen would not have had plows hitched to them that made their movements so strenuous, and they would not, without the action of the plows, they would not have turned up the ground. Those worms and those insects would have stayed nice and hidden and uneaten by the birds. It was his first inkling that we are all deeply connected. The action of the humans impacted the oxen and impacted the insects and impacted the worms. Deep connection. It's impossible, notoriously difficult, to tie ancient stories to actual historical dates. But if we imagine that this story about Siddhartha reflects some actual childhood experience of someone who would become a religious leader, then we can also imagine that it happened historically around the same time that Isaiah channeled God's voice to scold his community for trying to twist God's arms through their rituals while ignoring the needs of their neighbors, or worse, while actively exploiting their neighbors. The people who heard this, who first heard Isaiah yelling at them or read this text, they had some harrowing experiences in their recent history. So the book of Isaiah it's a collection of writings that spans at least 200 years. So obviously not the work of just one writer. By the time we have made it 58 chapters in, the people of Israel had been through the experience of exile. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire grew big, and they came in and invaded, carried the population off into exile. They destroyed the temple. Some 50 years later, Babylon was defeated by the Persian Empire, and the ruler of that empire let the Hebrew people go back into Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. So they'd been through exile. They'd seen their temple destroyed. They lived in hope that they might get back. And then the people, toward the end of Isaiah, had actually gotten back. And things were not going the way that they had anticipated. They were having trouble putting together their government. They were having trouble rebuilding the temple. They were demoralized that things were not the way they had been before. So they went through this trauma into a period of hope and expectation, into a period of excitement, and into then the harder reality of things not being what they wanted. We can hear their frustration implied in what it is that the prophet chooses to scold, or what God, through the prophet, scolds them for. Like they're saying, hey, God, we're doing these things, Praying, singing, going to church, listening to the rules we're supposed to follow. Heck, we've even been fasting, skipping meals. Don't you hear the music of praise in the gurgling of our stomachs? I mean, what gives? Why aren't you fixing things for us? It's one of my favorite passages of the Bible. There was a time in my life I had this memorized, and I could rattle it right off. It doesn't come quite as quickly or accurately any longer, but I know where to find it when I need a refresher. God, why don't you notice how we're humbling ourselves in front of you? It's a weird kind of humility that draws attention to itself, right? Oh, God, we're making ourselves miserable here. Why aren't you pleased about it? Because you're choosing to be miserable and then taking your misery out on poor people, you hangry knuckleheads. That part's implied in the text. Because you think that your temporary self-deprivation is going to somehow coerce God into bending to your desires, which isn't that kind of backward to how it ought to be? Even in the context of having been exiled and then having returned. Isaiah's society held the same tendency that seems to be universal across human cultures, to create insiders and outsiders, to organize those on the top and those on the bottom, and those on the top, at least judging by what the prophet says to them, felt entitled to God's responses, felt entitled to their positions, and felt entitled to use the other people as a prop to hold up their positions, all of which God responded to with a resounding no. The ground zero of this passage is that our spiritual health and well-being are tied to the actual health and well-being of other people. Fasting does no good if you are exploiting your workers. Prayers are worthless if you're withholding food aid from hungry people. Sermons are useless if you're hoarding your wealth while people shiver in the cold and while hungry people die of starvation and preventable diseases around the world. Piety is hollow and perverse if you're breaking up families, plucking people from their cars, their homes, their jobs, and their neighborhoods, sending them into concentration camps where they're too cold, too hungry, not getting enough to eat. To put it all in modern parlance, God says through the mouth of the prophet, I hear your prayers, I see your fasting, I see your piety, and I call bullshit. Your spiritual health is connected to the actual health of the people around you, of the people you don't know, of the, let's extend it to the other creatures in your ecosystem, of your ecosystems, of the worlds that you belong to, animal. We are all deeply connected. The beating heart of religion is to recognize this and act like it matters, and maybe like it's the only thing that matters. For those of us who want to be on the right side of things, there's a naughty underbelly to this knowledge of us all being connected. It means that we're connected to the people who are causing harm, too. They, too, belong to the world. They are part of us. Which means it's not enough to sit in judgment and let our rage simmer. It means we have to be moved to action. Shout for all you're worth, God said to the prophet. Raise your voice like a trumpet. God wanted the people to hear and be called back into connection. In the late 1990s, a resistance group in Serbia took a very public stand against the dictator, Slobodan Milosevic. They called themselves Otpor with an exclamation point. It means resistance. I imagine you have to do the motion like resistance. They use humor and play as part of their tactics. And their aim was to make the dictatorship look absurd and remind everyday Serbians that they were all connected, including those who were working for the dictatorship. The dictator did what dictators do, which was to lash out violently. Members of Otpor would get arrested and beaten up by the police on the regular, and then would show up, crowds of them would show up at police stations or even outside the homes of the officers and stand outside chanting, "You may not join us today, but you can join us tomorrow." In the regime's last stand before it fell in 2000, Otpor helped to organize hundreds of thousands of people from all over the country to march into the capital city, Belgrade. Milosevic, the dictator, ordered the military and the police to fire on the crowds. It would have been a bloodbath. But the officers who had heard these chants, "You may not join us today, but you can join us tomorrow," they held their fire. They were tired of being on the wrong side of history and didn't want to be that far on the wrong side of history, firing on massive unarmed crowds. They held their fire, and soon after, Milosevic was out of power. Maybe you have heard how that history is echoing in Minnesota right now, echoing in song even. One of the groups that has been taking part in the protests against ICE and Border Patrol's occupation of Minneapolis is a group called Singing Resistance. They draw direct inspiration from Otpor's work in Serbia. They're harnessing the power of song to connect people in powerful ways and to call ICE and Border Patrol to be their better selves. There's a video that's been going around social media this week. If you haven't seen it, just look it up. It's worth seeking out. It's from last Monday. Singing Resistance led a group of people through the streets of Minneapolis until they were all gathered outside and around in the parking lot of a Residence Inn. It happened to be a Residence Inn that is providing housing for ICE agents and or Border Patrol agents while they occupy the city. At least 2,000 people marched to there. There is an intergenerational gathering. People with signs, people with no signs, people there with their families and with their friends, people who made the crowd their family and their friends that day. They gathered around the motel in a big mass, and they clapped, and they banged tambourines, and they danced, and they sang, and what they sang was, "It's okay to change your minds, show us your courage, leave this behind. It's okay to change your minds, and you can join us here anytime." Let's learn that. It's okay to change your mind, show us your courage, leave this behind. It's okay to change your mind, and you can join us here anytime. I think I'll use this outside the ICE office at the vigil tomorrow. It's okay to change your mind, show us your courage, leave us behind. Not leave us behind, leave this behind. I gotta do it right if I'm gonna do it, right? It's okay to change your mind, show us your courage, leave this behind. It's okay to change your mind, and you can join us here anytime. Shout for all you are worth. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Proclaim to my people, you belong to the world. Let's notice, not the world belongs to you. You belong to the world. The hard kernel of salvation is this: we are all connected. This is God's good news. Amen.